Brian Scott with you again. We're continuing our insight to the end times. The Lord instructed us to share where we are on God's timetable when we began this series of teaching 6 months ago, and we're continuing. Today is episode number 182. I'm speaking to you out of Matthew chapter 24, looking at some of the signs Jesus said would denote the coming of the age, the end of the age, his return, etc. I want to first of all, repeat verse number 3 with you. This is where the disciples ask him the question, when will these things be? What will be the sign of your coming? And what will be the sign of the end of the age? He initially answers and talks about deception, and then he talks about false Christs who will deceive many. And then in verse number 6, he says, you'll hear of wars and rumors of wars. For nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. I want to deal with verse 6 today, wars and rumors of wars. And I look at how this has been evolving over the many years. The 20th century that concluded 20 years ago or so, it saw two major world wars. World War I occurred in the late 1914 to 1918 time period. At the beginning of the beginning of the century, and then World War II occurred in 1939 through 1945. These two world wars involved a lot of nations, resulted in a lot of deaths, and a lot of atrocities were committed during those times. Since then, we've had some smaller wars, like the Korean War in the 1950s, and the Vietnam War in the late 60s and early 70s. And then, of course, we've had Mid-Eastern wars, Desert Storm in the early 1990s, and then other variations of that and continuing. And we've had, essentially, since World War II ended in 1945, we have had one major war of some description occurring every year since. And we're 77 years past the 1945 conclusion of World War II. So we've had 77 major wars that have occurred. We've got a major war going on right now in the Ukraine as Russia attempts to seize lands there in the Ukraine. But I want to look with you at a few things that have occurred here. There have been wars to liberate nations, obviously. There have been wars that are civil wars and insurrections amongst the people, with thousands and thousands of people being slaughtered. There have been regime changes, such as in Afghanistan and Iraq, that have occurred as well, ongoing wars. And then Israel came into being in May of 1948. Everybody probably knows that time frame. But they've had 8 major wars since they became a nation. Their very first war came days or hours after they were granted status as a nation in 1948. Then they had the war in 1973, if I recall correctly. That was the Yom Kippur War. And don't forget the 6-Day War in 1967. All told, they've had 8 major skirmishes or wars. They've had all kinds of invasions. They've had all kinds of Palestinian, Israeli or Palestinian Arab conflicts. They've been a hotbed of war activity. Now, what Jesus said is you're going to hear of wars and rumors of wars. You're going to hear of nation against nation. You'll hear about kingdom against kingdom. But just think of in terms of the turmoil and almost warlike conditions that have existed in nations between different races, different classes of people. This has been slaughter city in so many different places. We've had wars. We're heading towards the greatest war ever, which is the Battle of Armageddon. Prior to that, that's at the very end of the tribulation period. Prior to that, we're going to see World War III occur. That's the war referred to in Ezekiel chapter 38, resulting in the end of that war in chapter 39. It will kick off the 7 years of tribulation. It will be a one-day war. It will wipe out a lot of people, a lot of nations. It's going to be something else. You don't want to be here for it. No, not at all. These are warlike days. It's one of the major signs of the end times, and there's intensification occurring. Just look at what's happening over in the Ukraine. Russia's basing that war on their claim to own those lands or occupy those lands in the 10th century. Makes no sense at all. The spirit of the Antichrist and the spirit of war is in the land. We're very close to the very end. Tomorrow we're going to continue. It will be a blessing to you. See you then.